All right, so on here we're going to bust through and talk about the valve train and all the components in it. Remember, the valve train is pretty much everything that's contained in the cylinder head that is allowing your valves to open and close. As we talk about that, we're going to talk about the belts and what they actually do so that we know how that valve train is turning at times. So we have your accessories that we talked about, such as your alternator, your power steering, and your air conditioning. Those are going to be driven by a serpentine belt, which has grooves that go along with it. Those can slip a little bit. It's not a big deal. However, we have a timing belt on many cars, and if we don't have a timing belt, we have a timing chain. It is critical for that not to slip, so they change, instead of having the grooves that run with it, they run against it. And we can see how the grooves go against it, and you have the pulleys that are set up so that it's very, very hard for it to slip, period. And if it slips, your car may run crappy or it may not run at all. And then we'll get talking further that if it slips, there are such things as interference and non-interference engines. And interference engine means that the valves and piston will smash each other and cause thousands of dollars worth of damage if something goes wrong, all in the name of getting more power out of the engine. And then there are non-interference engines that if your timing belt breaks, nothing bad is going to happen. All you have to do is go get a new belt on it. So your valve train, your camshaft is going to have lobes on it. Those lobes, once again, are going to be driven by the timing belt. Those lobes are going to open and close all your valves. The camshaft itself is known as the brain of the engine, and your crankshaft is the heart of the engine. That should just be a review. The size of the lobe, how far it comes out, will determine how much the valve opens. How wide the tip is going to determine how long it stays open. And how we get that valve to open from the camshaft can be done in a couple different ways. We have what is known as a rocker, which actually is a seesaw and takes this rotary motion and turns it into a linear motion. Or we also have what is called a tappet, and that is basically an upside down circle, a bucket, and it will surround it, and that will transfer it, because we can see right here we would have a lot of friction, and that would be wanting to make your valve bend sideways, which would not be good. On those interference engines, they would come up and hit the piston. The piston, since we are going through it and some of you guys are struggling with the parts, your piston itself has what's known as a kingpin, and it is connected to a connecting rod. The connecting rod goes around your crankshaft, and there are what are called bearing inserts in here that have a little oil passages ways so that we can have almost no friction and the oil coming out there as you run. And what you guys don't know, and will probably never be asked, is there are little holes in here where the oil gets pumped out to reduce the friction, as does your camshaft. Your crankshaft, looking at it from both sides, on one side, it is going to be driving the main pulley that drives your accessories. On the other side, your crankshaft is bolted to the flywheel. Your flywheel is a large, heavy piece of metal that has teeth on the end of it, so your starter can turn it. It also, with that weight, when we start spinning it multiple thousands of times per minute, starts to smooth out the momentum, which is actually one of the large reasons why we have it as well. And it also acts as the intermediate area where we come over and connect to your transmission. So here's a closer look at your timing belt again. Timing belt with the grooves. You can see the kind of the sprockets across the camshaft, and then your grooves going up and down the entire way. That is important. Should generally be changed by recommendation, but normally that falls between 70 and 100,000 miles. If you push a car beyond 70 to 80,000 miles, you start to get into a sketchy area that if it needs to get changed and it breaks, it can cause very expensive damage. You have to replace the valves as long with a lot of the internals for your cylinder head. Look at the serpentine that is allowable to slip because the grooves go with it. A lot easier to change. If it breaks, it's not a big deal. You simply will not have your alternator working, which means you won't be able to drive too far, but it's not going to be critical. You'll run out. You'd probably actually be good for about a half an hour running off the power just in the battery. You'd lose AC. Bigger issue is if you had a water pump on the outside like this one, then we would run into cooling issues and your car might overheat. To discuss it again, your engine block. On top of your engine block is your cylinder head. Your cylinder head contains your valves and camshaft. In order to open and close those valves and get what it needs, you have the exhaust manifold, which is going to get rid of all the exhaust and lead it to eventually to your tailpipe. And on the other side would be your intake manifold that is in charge of managing your air and fuel, which is the more important and really what we need a computer for. On top of your cylinder head to keep everything clean, and where you pour your oil is your valve cover, and then we have your oil pan on the bottom. Hopefully that all makes sense, and you guys can ask any questions that you need. Camshaft, we kind of know. Talked about the valves already. Here's a picture of your tappet. Your tappet, like I said, is that upside down kind of garbage can that allows the valve to go perfectly up and down and not go sideways because it is contained inside the cylinder head. And that tappet just basically kind of spins as the camshaft is rotating and also pushes up and down on your valve. Valves can get super hot, and when they do, we need to dissipate that heat out. Otherwise, if the valve gets too hot, it can instantly blow up the gasoline as it's going into the car. So we have what is called a valve seat mounted in the cylinder head, and that helps transfer the heat away. And we can kind of see in the corner that there would be some coolant that would draw the heat away. We also have a valve guide that we won't talk about too much, but that holds it from wiggling back and forth. And on top of that, because there's always oil flowing around and we don't want oil going into your engine compartment by your pistons, there's a little valve stem seal that keeps the oil out of your combustion chamber. And occasionally, as your car gets high miles, it will start to wear down that valve stem seal. Oil will start to creep in your valves along the way, or your piston has piston rings and those will start to break down. I'm not going to talk about valve sizes. We already talked about your valve seat there. There's your valve stem seal, which keeps the oil out of your combustion chamber, and that should be